Finally, a laptop that I can happily recommend. This is the Asus STRIX G15, specifically the G513QR, an RTX 3070 laptop-based machine rocking a Ryzen 7 5800H, 16GB of 3200MHz DDR4, which is upgradeable by the way, and a 1TB SSD with a spare M.2 slot for you to upgrade later. Oh, and a stunning 300Hz display that finally made me interested in ultra high refresh rate panels. And all of that for under $2,000. Wow. Let's take a look at this thing. Of course, first, if you haven't already, consider subscribing for more videos like this one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. The first next-gen laptop I got my hands on was the Asus Zephyrus Duo, an incredible machine, but rocking an RTX 3080 that, while named the same as its desktop counterparts, wasn't even the same chip and only offered half the performance. The next one was the TUF-F15, a more budget-friendly machine that had an i7 that had just 4 cores and left so much performance on the table from its RTX 3070 that it was, at least in some games, almost unplayable. So when I finally got the chance to check out the STRIX G15, not to be confused with the Zephyrus G15, which are totally separate machines, I jumped on the opportunity since on paper this is a much more well-rounded laptop. Its Ryzen 7 5800H CPU offers 8 cores and up to 4.3 GHz in boost clocks, as well as a well-rounded performance profile. Pair that with the RTX 3070, specifically the 115 watt TDP model, aka Max P, and you've got a killer gaming experience, especially on this stunning 1080p 300Hz display. Seriously, playing on this made me actually feel a noticeable difference in how I was playing games, how I was analyzing things better, and feeling like the Elite Pro that I am definitely not. I can't explain how good of a playing experience this is. Words like snappy and responsive don't quite do it justice, but let's just say that I'm a massive fan. In terms of performance, you get a lot out of this. You can either leave it in the performance mode in their Armory software, or if you don't mind a bit of extra fan noise, because especially in performance mode it's remarkably quiet, then you can stick it in turbo. That's mostly for extra CPU horsepower, as it shows on the little sort of spider graph. In CPU workloads, the 5800H that's in here smashes literally everything except for its higher power brother, the 5900HX. Let's take a look at those benchmark results. Starting off with the Cinebench and the single-threaded test, you can see that the 5800H in the STRIX G15 is pretty much the second fastest chip I've tested. The 11370H in the -F15 does come relatively close, but that's still well under 500 points, whereas the 5800H offers over 500 or even close to 550 in turbo mode. There's actually a fairly sizable performance difference between performance and turbo mode here, although it doesn't quite match the 5900HX as you'd expect. In the multi-threaded workloads, this one is a bit of a bigger gap to the 1500HX, but also has a sizable advantage over the 1000HK and the last gen 4800H as well. There's a lot less of a performance gap between performance and turbo mode, mostly thanks to the thermals, as I'll show you in a second. There's a pretty big well, basically it sits at almost 100 degrees Celsius in turbo mode, so it's kind of throttling on heavier workloads. You can see that quite clearly in the Blender BMW render, where, technically speaking, the slightly better cooled 4800H actually completes it ever so slightly faster. It's not worlds apart, it's only a few seconds in it, but the difference in performance between turbo and performance, mostly thanks to their fan profiles, is a little bit bigger here. When it comes to Gooseberry though, this one makes a lot more sense. It's not quite as fast as the 1500HX, but it still offers basically class-leading performance. It's still faster than the 10900HK, the 10875H, and definitely the 11370H, the -F15. When it comes to Premiere, this one is always a bit of a strange test. I found that it tends to use the GPU no matter which setting you have it set to, and so this kind of varies, but I'll leave this up so you can have a look and just have a reference for that figure. In gaming, it's amazing too. With turbo mode enabled, you can even get 60 FPS in Cyberpunk on ultra settings, which is quite a feat, and especially compared to the tough F15 with its 80-watt variant of the 3070 and its rather weak 11370H, that struggle hit 40. Which is kind of insane. Starting off with COD Modern Warfare at 1080p on high ultra settings with ray tracing disabled, you're looking at around 120 FPS in turbo, around 115 in performance mode. Despite the turbo mode, in theory, only upgrading the CPU performance, there is a 6 FPS gap here, although the 1% lows stay pretty much the same. Compared to the 3080, which is also a 115-watt model, there is a pretty sizable gap, but compared to the tough F15, there is a equally sizable gap considering that still has a 3070 and is visibly branded the same, but that's the Max Q type model, the 80-watt TDP version, and has that slower 11370H CPU instead. When it comes to Cyberpunk, this one is a very CPU limited game in general, and so as you can see, going from performance mode to turbo and upgrading that CPU performance gets you a significant performance advantage. Just shy of 10 FPS more from the same hardware, just with a slightly faster CPU and much better 1% lows as well. It's still not obviously as fast as the Zephyrus Duo with the 1500HX and the 3080, but it gets remarkably close considering that, you know, it's a 3070 rather than 3080 and a slightly slower CPU. In Watch Dogs Legion, this is again a similar trend where the turbo mode offers a fairly sizable performance advantage, and so if you're going to be playing games, it's probably recommended to play in turbo mode, and a good performance advantage over the F15 with, like I said, the visibly similar chip, at least in terms of its naming scheme anyway. It actually gets remarkably close to the Zephyrus Duo here as well, only 5 FPS slower, and similar if not technically better 1% lows, at least in its turbo mode. And in Fortnite, this is a more conventional game where the GPU tends to take a bit more of the strain rather than the CPU, and you can see that with the performance versus turbo being only 3 FPS, give or take, in it, whereas the 3080 gets more like 160 rather than 130, and the F15 being relatively CPU limited and having the slower GPU means that it's running at more like 100 rather than 130. So pretty big difference there. Temps and power draw are the main drawback here, as with the CPU, even in performance mode, peaking at 100 degrees Celsius and sitting around 94 degrees Celsius in games. In turbo mode, it isn't much better. Despite the much higher fan speeds, it's still running at the same temps, but it's now pulling 80 watts through the CPU rather than the stock 65. It does thermal throttle in performance mode on longer tests like rendering in Blender, even though in the BMW render only takes about 3 minutes and 30 seconds on this machine. You can see on the orange line on this graph, which is the temperatures, that drops, as well as the package power, that drops as well, despite the blue line being the 100% load on the CPU being pretty constant. In turbo mode, that doesn't happen, although the temps are a lot quicker to rise to just shy of 100 and pretty much stay there throughout the duration of the test. Happily though, there is next to no heat transfer to the keyboard plate. The entire keyboard was usable while gaming, and even the section above the keyboard, which is normally, you know, a thermonuclear reactor, is reasonably usable. I think it didn't hit over about 40 degrees Celsius, so that's a welcome change from some of the other models that I've tested recently. And speaking of the keyboard, it's alright. It's nothing too special, but offers a good layout and some full-size media keys, which are definitely a big plus, plus some smaller volume keys and that sort of thing, which is also pretty good too. In terms of the typing feel, it's good, but if a touch soft for my taste personally, the key travel is reasonable, as is the actuation, meaning it works well for gaming too. The trackpad is massive. I did have an issue with palm rejection not working while I was typing, but other than that, it works about as well as pretty much any Windows trackpad can. And then there's the display. Like I said, it is stunning. I always like to commend accurate marketing, and again, Asus has done that here, as the sticker right on the panel says that it is a 3 millisecond display, which it is. In fact, it could even be closer to 2 milliseconds, so even better. Sadly, the white to black response time is a little slower, as it always is, at near 12 milliseconds, but that didn't result in basically any ghosting. Seriously, look at the UFO test, there is next to no trail at all. I also like to test total system input lag, as in the time between you clicking your mouse and having a gun firing in-game on screen. Most laptops score relatively badly here compared to desktops in the 50 to 60 millisecond range, but this though was closer to 30. Oh, and it covers pretty accurately 100% of the sRGB spectrum. I am genuinely impressed with both this panel and this machine in general. Taking a look inside, you'll see a reasonably beefy cooling solution and setup there. Technically it's a little underpowered for the hardware, as you've seen with the temperatures, but I'd argue that could be more down to the insanely quiet fan profile they have on the performance mode, which you can of course adjust with a fan profile tweak. Either way, you've also got two SODIMM DDR4 slots, which are user replaceable, although come pre-populated with two 8GB 3200 MHz DIMMs, which is a reasonable choice for the CPU. You've also got an empty M.2 slot should you want to add more storage later, which is always a nice touch. So beyond running a bit hot, which like I said you can adjust with the fan profile, then it's possibly the best gaming laptop you can buy right now. It's powerful enough to run pretty much any game at ultra settings, or if you want to make use of the 300Hz display, you can always turn that down or play more esports oriented titles. It's also thin and light enough to be portable, and it's got plenty of horsepower for even creative workloads too. All for, at least currently, around £1,700. Sure, that's not the cheapest on the planet, but what you're getting is an incredible experience and a well-balanced machine that should last you for a fair while. While I personally like the Zephyrus Duo, and the extra display means for my workloads when I'm traveling and on the go is kind of a nice benefit, the fact that this is around half the price of that makes this a very compelling option, considering that it offers very similar physical performance. This is a fantastic machine that gets a solid recommendation from me. Of course, those are my thoughts, and I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. What do you think of the Strix G15? Is this a machine you'd pick up yourself? Is this configuration maybe slightly too much with a 300Hz display? Would you like something else? Anything at all, let me know in those comments down below. As always, I'll be leaving a link to the Strix G15, rather than the Zephyrus, in the description down below if you check out. That's an Amazon affiliate link that will take you to the local Amazon store. We can see pricing when and where you watch this, because it can and does vary. Otherwise, there is a whole load of other links in the description you can check out, from merch or hoodies or t-shirts like this one, or a load of other cool designs. There's also Patreon for access to our Money Men Discord chat and sponsor-free videos, and of course supporting me directly too. And there's a load of other affiliate links for places like Overclockers UK if you're buying from there, VPN options, a load of stuff you can check out. I'm going to leave some more videos on the end cards, maybe check out the Tough Dash F15 video, as that's a bit of a contrast to this one. And if you're interested in car videos, reviews and guides and that sort of stuff, check out my second channel, At The Wheel, which is linked on the end cards as well. Otherwise, that's pretty much it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next video.